Right, can I welcome you all to the meeting of the Charities and Trusts Committee. Can we start? Do we have any apologies? Apologies.
Apologies from Councillor Snape.
Yeah, he's on royal duty today, isn't he? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. Minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of June 2022. Have we agreed?
Item 2, declarations of interest.
Sorry, let me just... Sorry, go again. With your microphone on.
Are we doing item 2, direction?
You're moving them, are you?
Are we doing item 2, declarations of interest? No?
Something's not happening.
Can you hear me now?
Should be.
Can you hear?
I can hear you.
Right. You've missed item 2, declarations of interest.
Yep. Do we have any declarations of interest?
Could I ask the question on the minutes from the last one? District councillors had put down declarations of interest. Do I have to declare being a member of Stafford District Borough Council?
If it relates to an item on the agenda, then yes, please.
It might be best just to declare it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Right. No other declarations of interest. Minutes of the meeting held on the 14th of June.
Move the minutes.
Thank you.
Happy to second if you need, Chair.
You can sort them out. Fine. Item 4 is Endowment Charities Annual Accounts 2021-22. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Bring to you today the accounts, the simplified accounts for the 12 charities for which the County Council is the custodian trustee. And we obviously administer the charities on behalf of the managing trustees who sort of look after the allocation of income. The County Treasurer is responsible for the day-to-day financial affairs of the charities, obviously in recording of that income and expenditure. We also make sure that the expenditure is in accordance with the obligations stated in the trust deed. And on the back of that, we produce the annual accounts for the 12 charities listed. You, as in your duties as custodian trustee, are required to approve those accounts, and that's why they're brought to this committee today. Charity Commission regulations also state that charities with income levels over 25,000 must submit a copy of their annual accounts and an annual report from the trustees and a report from the independent examiner auditor. And 3 of the 12 charities that we bring to you today fall within that category. They have been audited by the Internal Audit Service of the County Council prior to the submission to the Charity Commission. And the details of the various accounts are in Appendix 1. We will bring to you at some point in the future a report of the churches, charities and local authorities, CCLA investment management team, who look after the investments of the various charities. But today, we're just asking for your approval of the accounts and that we be permitted to submit them to the Charity Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Can we just perhaps slightly reflect on the current economic situation? I know that most people's savings in ISAs and various things all reduced. Do we feel that the investments that we have are likely to come under threat? Well, they will come under threat, but how serious do we feel the threat might be?
One of the things that CCLA are very good at is maintaining the level of income that they distribute on the investments. So whilst the capital value might go up or down, the actual income, which is the bit that's really important to the charities to be able to fulfil their objectives, should maintain itself. It should remain stable. So the dividend that gets paid out, which is the important thing to the charities, will remain the same this year as it was the previous 2 years. Obviously, the capital value of those assets might go up or down, which only becomes an issue if we need to sell them. So at the moment, they should ride through the storm. They're predominantly invested in equities, but we don't anticipate any impact on the charities themselves.
Because I think it's very strange with investments that you have and income tax-free investments that people take. If you see a drop in them, unless you're going to cash them in, you look at it and you swallow hard and say, well, it's gone down. But if you're looking at that needing to provide an income, as some of our charities do, we do have a degree of threat, because once you've spent the money, you can't get the interest on it.
I would say that obviously that most of the investment is permanently invested. So they have to have good reason to actually request to spend that, to have that release and spend it. So typically they own units, and it's those units that get the dividend paid on them. So there shouldn't be much change in that year on year. I think the other thing that's fair to say about the type of investments they have is it's not just equity markets. CCLA will invest in things like infrastructure, where again there's a good income return from those assets, and they are typically inflation proofed as well. So by investing and diversifying the investments, that's why CCLA can maintain that income. And as I say, as long as the charities don't sell any of that permanent endowment, which they have to have the permission of the Charity Commission to do so anyway, and your approval, then they should be, as I say, that income should be maintained.
Thank you.
Chair.
Any questions? Tom? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you sort of answered the question there when you said that the chair asked how you cope with the ups and downs. On what you've just said, just for my clarity, basically it's long-term loans and interests and possibly some bonds that they tend to go for with slightly lower yield, but with a consistent yield over a longer period. Is that correct?
It's actually a mixture of things. So there will be in equities, obviously pay the dividend, bonds, pay the coupon. Say infrastructure, there will be an income from that. Private debt, private equity, all of those mixture of assets were there in that portfolio. So I say the capital appreciation is one thing, but the income is the other focus. So for our charities, it's about having that income to distribute every year, and that's what CCLA work on, being consistently able to provide for the charities.
Yeah, I'm sure it's in the report somewhere, or will be in the report. What's the average sort of yield then on percentage-wise? For the money they've got, there must be
I think it's been around 6 to 7% this year, but don't quote me on that. I will have to just check that for you. But obviously, typically, with the bulk of it invested in equity markets, which have done well, then that sort of average yield is maintained quite high.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. With no other comments. So, do we agree the report? Moved? Seconded? All in favour? Thank you. Could we move on then to agenda item 5, which is on its way. We're nearly there. Right, agenda item 5, Brood Middle School orchard planting. Who's taking us through that? Thank you.
Yep, so the County Council has received requests from Brood Middle School to allow an area of the school land to be planted as a community orchard. They've been in dialogue with, sorry, let me right there. They've been in dialogue with the Forest of Mercia, who have agreed that they would provide the trees and they would also maintain them for a period of 2 years. The area of the land itself is held under the Brood Educational Charity as SCC as trustees. And there's quite a specific aspect to that in the respect that it should be used for educational purposes, which has been sort of referenced by my legal colleagues. The area isn't required for basic need requirement for the future. We've had confirmation from schools organisation that it's very unlikely the land would be required for a school expansion. There is adjacent land that is perfectly able to accommodate any requirements suggested. From a financial aspect, the trees, like I say, would be funded by Forest of Mercia using DEFRA funding. The school are happy with any future liability of maintaining those trees. From a legal perspective, obviously, the stipulation around the use being for educational purposes is a dilemma because this is essentially there is some element of community use in this. However, from further clarification from the school, they have confirmed that the majority of this land and use, they're suggesting 80% plus, would be purely for the school and the adjacent St Mary's and St Chad's school, which is in the area. They have also stated that if the community aspect and use is too difficult to get agreement via the charity, that they would be happy to also say that the stipulation that it would only be used for the school purposes in the future. And they don't envisage using, charging for any of this in the future is one thing that sort of was raised as well, and they would cover the public liability aspects of it. So I suppose the ask here really is, are we happy about allowing the school to allow a community orchard to be planted on the site, bearing in mind that it does essentially blight that land, or could blight that land in the future. But we're also getting feedback from our education colleagues that the land wouldn't necessarily be needed for school expansion. The land at the moment is just an overgrown piece of land with general rubble, which is adjacent to the playing fields.
Thank you. Any comments? Mark, any comment? Tom.
Yep, thank you. So it seems to be a no-brainer, right? All the stakeholders are on board. It's within the carbon neutral sort of focus as well. One question I do have, though, I can't see from this the location plan, one of the attachments. It refers to Damson Lodge, or Damson Lodge. What is that, please?
Damson Lodge, it isn't actually our property. It's just an adjacent property. It's on the plan. These are the plans they've provided. The actual, there's a larger sort of scale plan which sort of shows the area. It's just a private property adjacent to it. Yeah.
Have we had any view from them? The reason I ask that is because as councillors, we constantly get contacted by people in properties where county or borough trees are causing issues on their property, and there seems to be a property right next to it. So have we had any view from Damson Lodge? Who owns that?
Yeah, the school informed me that they've engaged with the local people and they've had very positive feedback. I believe they did a circular out to the local residents and they had very positive feedback on it. They were all happy with it. There's no objections that I'm aware of that have come from that adjacent property. No. The orchard itself, actually, the planting of it, brings it away from the boundaries anyway. So what I would say to you is the trees that would be planted, they do not align alongside the boundary of the property. They would be significantly in and away from it and would allow enough growth, if you see what I mean, in terms of future. Orchard trees tend to grow a little bit slower anyway, to be fair, and if you're managing them correctly, you do tend to keep them quite condensed because they produce more fruit, is what I would say.
Okay, so it's not as close as it looks on that map then, that's the point you're saying? Okay.
No, it's got quite a good distance between it, yeah.
Okay, that was the only point from me. Thank you.
Yeah. Mark.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions from me. I couldn't quite understand in the text. It said it's in a conservation area if you wanted to take it away, you'd have to get planning permission off the district council. It doesn't say whether it would need planning permission to be put there in the first place. That's a simple question. Does it need planning permission? The next one for me is looking at the photograph with the sites on. It says potential new build zone and potential compensatory land. Is that something that's going ahead now or not? What's that all about? And then the third one is, if there is building on the site, and the school goes, what sort of protection will there be for the orchard? Will it have a protected status for the future? So sorry, three fairly complicated questions there.
From a planning perspective, I don't believe it would need planning to actually plant the orchard there. The reason why in a conservation area, if you try and remove trees that are established, you do have to get consent even if they aren't under a TPO order, which is why I say the risk in the future, not so much now, but the risk in the future is that if those trees did become established, we would have to apply to the local district or borough council, with it being in the conservation area, to actually do any work or remove those trees in the future. So there is a risk around that in the future, definitely. It's, you know, that they wouldn't be TPO'd, and you generally do not TPO orchard or fruit trees. But it is a risk, but a low risk is what I would say. In terms of the potential new build zone, this was the feedback we had from our schools organisation team, was that if we were ever going to build in the future, it would be built in that potential new build zone. That isn't to say that there is a requirement yet to build, but what they're saying is that if there was a requirement in the future, that would be the most likely position that they would do the building and expansion. The potential compensatory land is to offset essentially the playing field aspect that they would be building on adjacent to it. So again, you could argue that if there was any playing field being built on, there's sufficient alternative playing field that isn't currently being withdrawn into their boundaries, so to speak, or in their calculations, that would enable expansion in the future. Yep.
Okay. And, and what happens if the final question? What happens if as we do occasionally, decide we don't need that school site?
Well, the funding arrangements for the trees, then there's no legal binding agreement, which is quite interesting because a lot of the agreements we do get, they tend to try and bind the land for 10 years. So if you're doing a planting scheme, they will bind it for 10 years. There's no binding as such on this, just 2 years maintenance. I think the implication is more the expectation with those trees being there, that they will remain on site and will continue to remain on site. So because there is such a community support around this and the environmental factors, that is a risk, I think, in the future, definitely, that we would get some resistance if we ever decided to, it's unlikely, but if we ever were to decide to dispose of the asset in the future, we would, I suspect, get some resistance on those trees being on there if we decided to remove them as part of any planning applications. Yes, it is a risk. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And my final question, and apologies for asking questions, but that's what we're here for. Yep. In terms of the trust, whichever trust we're on, what does the trust own on that site? Because we basically the school's coming to the trust about the orchard bit. How much is it the footprint, or is it the buildings, or what does the trust actually own?
This is quite a peculiar site. There's actually, if I remember correctly, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, I think there are 3 elements to this. The parts of this are SCC controlled, no effect whatsoever. And then there are another 2 trusts, if I remember correctly, and they've got different land holdings. So this particular area of land that we're talking about is affected by, and that's the Brood Educational Charity. But I think there's another charity on site which holds other land on the site, and then there are areas that have transferred to them. It's also, if I remember correctly, it has actually transferred to them as trustees as well, large portions of it. So there are actually 3 landholders, varying parcels on the site.
So this piece here, where the proposed orchard is, you don't know how much more the trust owns than that?
No, I do, but I can't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
I'd have to provide you with a plan, but I do know what they own, yes.
Yeah, so just for safety, That proposed orchard site is 100% Brood Education Trust.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. So sorry to be a bit searching
No,
there,
that's fine.
Chair. Thank you.
Tom, anything else to add? Any other comments? We've been asked
Yes,
to...
Chair, sorry. I don't think you can hear me. I think we just need to record in the minutes that we have discussed whether there's going to be any community use, because the actual objects of the charity are for school use only. So it's whether we are going to permit community use as well as the school use of the orchard.
Fine. We're being asked... Sorry, you...
Yeah, just to comment on that. I would say as long as it's safe for the school and in terms of the community use, it should have community use. We're being pushed at the moment to provide green spaces and green initiatives. And if this trust is an educational trust, it hasn't just got to be about children. It should be about educational for all. Is that going to cause a problem?
I was going to say, would that not be a decision for the school, though? Not for us?
It's not a decision for the school because the land is held by the trustees. It's the trustees' responsibility to ensure that the land is used in accordance with the original trust deed. That specifies that it is to be used for agricultural purposes for schools only. So to allow the community to use it is in breach of the original trust. We would need to write to the Charity Commission and get them to approve it if we were going to allow community use.
Okay, so but we're not being asked that. That's not what this is about, though. So we're not being asked about the use of it, are we? We've been asked whether they can plant it, and then that would be a separate question to come back and change the trust deed to be able to do something else with it, right?
I think it's all part and parcel at this stage.
Is it? I didn't see it in here.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, it does tie in really that the decision. I mean, we can go back to the school, is what I would say, and say that we don't particularly want any community use on this. And happy that it continues as an orchard and it's planted up, but with the stipulation would be that no community use. That is something they said, that if there was a major problem, they would agree to that. But I think the sort of principle that Vanessa sort of mentioned is more around, that the majority of this use, the 85% plus of this use, will be for the school. And it's just there will be a little bit of, there's an ancillary element to this where it would be community, but the school sort of said, well, it's actually more about, it's there for the community, it's about pollinators, bees, those kind of things. So they haven't suggested to me that they're going to open it up in an evening and have the gates open and the people can go in and use it. That isn't the element of community use that they're suggesting.
I think we all know that the vast majority of schools are, during the school's operational hours, are completely restricted just to school use, and that's what the school has said. So we're talking about that outside normal school hours. The vast majority of schools offer use to the community as part of their asset. As this committee, I don't believe has ever looked into the other parts on this and said, well, does the school use trust land for these sort of side benefits for the community in terms of using those assets? So I think Vanessa's right to say that it should be a consideration, and you're right to have a debate. But I think we need to make it quite clear that the school has said to us that this is primarily school, it's separated for the school use during normal school hours, and in effect, the only community use would be the same as any other parts of school playing fields and the like that are made available for community use. I think the important thing for us here is that any community use is by consent and no rights are established. So that's been cleared with the school in terms of there won't be any permanent rights and there won't be any charging. So it is obviously for the committee to decide, but I think that the principal use is for the school and for those educational purposes, and anything else is just a secondary benefit. I think in terms of options, so I think it would be a step too far to write to the Charity Commission and try and change the objectives to include this. I think potentially, and Vanessa will have a comment on this, whether there is another kind of just writing to clarify that with the Charity Commission, or rest on this discussion here and saying actually any community use is incidental and the benefit is primarily for the school, and any community use isn't to the detriment of the school. So I think there's three broad options. There's some debate about the last two. I think changing the charity objectives is far over the top for what's being requested here. Thank you.
We're being asked to make a decision for or against. Presumably, if we were to decide against, that's the end of the story, isn't it? If we decide for, then do we have any problem with that decision at all in the light of the present discussion?
Chair, looking at the proposal in front of us, I'm minded to to say yes. It makes sense as I said, in the modern world where we're trying to do more, raise more awareness of food and farming, which is obviously the orchard bit, and in terms of the environment and everything else. I'm not happy, and apologies for saying this, I'm not happy about the fairly fluffy we'll see what happens in terms of the community use. I'd like, and it would mean deferring the application, but I'd like to see some sort of statement from the school in terms of as has been said, as Ian said quite clearly, a lot of schools now allow their assets to be used out of school hours, and that makes sense. And if it's an orchard, I mean, the people of Brood would probably love to have some limited access to this. But as it is at the moment, we've got nothing in front of us that says this is the sort of access it's going to have. And I'd like to see something from the school or a negotiation between yourselves, so it's on paper and it says we intend to even if it's 2 days a year or something, allow communities in to get involved with this asset, which is a public asset and it's public money we're dealing with.
I don't know whether the best advice is from you or from an officer. Sorry, I haven't asked the question yet. If we delay and defer this item, do we actually miss a planting season on when the trees should be planted, and are we being churlish in doing that?
If people, it wouldn't take long just to get a letter together, and it could be circulated by email. And the members who are here could say, yes, I'm happy with that. And the planting season should really go through till sort of February, March time, if I'm not wrong on that. But I'd like, it'd be interesting to see what legal say about my input.
We just come to Tom first.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say that the explanation you gave, so I don't know the explanation you gave a moment ago, I think answered the fears, right, for when it can be used and when it cannot be used. Although it's not explicit in here, I think we're wrong to reject it based on that today. Can we not approve based on it ticking what the gentleman here explained, you know, that it is used, there is community use outside of school hours? Can we not just approve it based on that being the case? And if that's not the case, can we put some kind of motion to it that means we're not wasting time if that is the case? Do you see what I mean? Can we approve it, assuming the school can confirm that is the case?
Ian, if we can come back to you, I think that we've now got three decisions to make, either to accept, refuse or defer. Perhaps you can advise us.
Yeah, I mean, what I would encourage you to do as members is to put this into context. So as Councillor Winnington's quite rightly said, and we've tried to lay out, there is no risk to the operation here of the school or in the future. It's the right thing to do. The community want it, you know, in terms of the school community and that kind of thing. we're kind of quite clear that it won't be to the detriment. So I think my suggestion would be, and I think both Councillor Winton and Councillor Jay have covered it, is that we basically, consent to it, but with a condition about the community use. So we can do that, and then that's quite clear. Is to say that there won't be any in school hours. It'll all be outside of school hours. It won't be to the detriment, and there's no permanent rights established. That's fairly easy for us to condition on that basis.
In that sense, it's not different from a playing field, is it?
Correct.
So if we were looking to approve a playing field, we wouldn't be having this discussion, or would we?
I don't believe we'd be so worried about it. No, I think we would accept that is the benefit. I mean, yeah. So I think that would be my recommendation, and then you can make the decision now, and they can get on with doing what they want to do.
Chair, could we have
just a second, Mark. Tom.
So that was the word I was looking for, a condition. So I think we should approve with that condition, and I'm happy to move it with that.
Could we ask legal what that condition would look like? Because it's a bit sort of chicken and egg or horse and whatever, to horse before the trailer or behind the trailer, to grant it with a condition that might be right in the future.
I think we can deal with it quite simply by saying that any use has to be in accordance with the academy lease, because this area and the remainder of the school land is leased under the terms of the standard academy lease, which requires it to be used for predominantly school purposes. So if we said that there's to be no fine as long as it's in accordance with the academy lease, then by agreeing this, we're not agreeing any changes to the lease precedents or any other uses outside those that have already been permitted.
So we'd basically be saying we want it to have community use within the bounds of the lease that exists with the school. So it gives them the chance to say, well, in the lease it says school property and whatever else, but we've highlighted the fact we want some access for the community. Is that right?
Well, it's highlighting that we're acknowledging that under the trust, they should only be using it for school use. So we're happy for them to plant the orchard and to use the orchard in accordance with the academy lease. If they then wanted to host an event which was outside of the academy lease, which was more than we could authorise, then they would need to come back and ask for additional consents for things like that. But at least it would allow the planting to go ahead and the general use.
So we're back to go again. It's just the school use and no...
I think the reality is there's not going to be any excessive community use in this situation. So it would cover us in the sense that in this forum, we've looked and considered the charitable trust objects, and we're comfortable that the school can use this in accordance with the academy lease and allow the planting to go ahead. But in the event that there was any excessive use, then we've got the protection under the lease that they would need to come back for additional consents.
Well, that's the other way around that I wanted it. I would have preferred to have some sort of commitment that there would be some community use that didn't, as Ian said, didn't actually affect the school operation.
But technically, we can't permit excessive community use without approaching the Charity Commission for their consent. As Ian said, to ask for a formal alteration to the charity scheme would be excessive in this circumstance. The cost and time that would take doesn't justify the use and the situation we are in. Other than that, we haven't got the ability to authorise any further community use other than is permitted by the academy lease.
Ian, if I don't think that giving community access to an orchard by nature of the beast of what the school is producing is necessarily a good thing, but the crop that comes off it would be for community use and community benefit. Does that qualify in any way to satisfy the points that Councillor is making?
I'm not 100% sure, really, because I mean, part of what the schools say is that actually they talk about this as a community orchard, and we're thinking that that means that people go round and having picnics and go round collecting the fruit. Actually, it's the wider community benefits of having, you know, kind of an orchard in there in terms of the wildlife, the insects, and all of that kind of thing. So I think we do need to. I think we've, like I say, leapt into, there might be a fair on there or something, and, you know, these kinds of activities where the people from the community traipse all over it. That isn't the concept of a community orchard. The concept is that it's a good thing environmentally to have in the community. What we're trying to say is that, I don't know, let's say the Scouts and Guides want to go and do something around trees and the environment and that kind of stuff. They might go for a trip there on, you know, one of their evening meetings and that kind of stuff. It's no different from any other academy that we've got. And the county council, as a landowner, wouldn't be entering into this level of debate. They'd be saying, we have the protections under the lease, so that it is primarily for the school, but schools are part of the community, and they do allow communities to use their assets for the wider benefit outside of school hours, and that aren't to the detriment of the operation and the safe running, etc., of the school. So we have all that covered off. The only thing we're doing here is, because this is the trust and it's a charity, that we just have to be mindful of the objectives. And what Vanessa actually asked was that this just committee kind of has that debate and acknowledges that it has actually been considered. And is that the fact that a community orchard, is that to the detriment of the objectives of the trust? And what we're trying to do as officers is to say to you, there is enough protection in the proposal and the restrictions around the lease to say that no, that won't happen, because, as Vanessa quite rightly pointed out, this is operated under a standard academy lease that's a kind of nationally derived document that everybody objects to, which is about making sure that schools are there and you know, have that property and that facility to run as best they can with all the constraints around education and funding, etc., etc. So I think very much the officer's point here is there are enough controls around this in terms of its operation. We tried to give you the evidence to say that doing this won't be a detriment to expansion of the school should that be necessary in future. The only slight risk is a long term when the orchard is established, if some, and Councillor Winnington pointed it out, is, well, what happens if that school moves somewhere else or closes? Potentially, there are restrictions on that land, but that is such a small risk for the positive advantages that the officer's recommendation is just to proceed, and there are enough controls already in existence.
Tom?
I think that's clarified it enough, and I move that we approve it.
Just a silly thought that if you give community access to somewhere where there is edible produce being produced, and someone goes in there, takes an apple off the tree, becomes seriously ill and dies, who carries liability over that?
I wouldn't profess to know that. What I would suggest is we have clarified the point, and again that it's in the lease, is that it is for the school who control who can go into their land or not to have public liability insurance.
It rather seemed to me that the recommendation gave us more satisfaction over that than placing a lot of conditions on our possible approval.
Yeah, sorry, I mean, and that was why it's very useful to have Vanessa here, and she picked me up on my failing. So when I was talking about conditions, Of course, Vanessa's pointed out that those conditions are already there within that academy lease. So we don't need to say anything else. We just give them the consent because the conditions are already there to be operated to. Forgive me, because I didn't know whether it was a maintained school or an academy. So under a maintained school, we'd have to tell them specifically, but under the academy lease, it's what they can and can't do is already laid out.
Yes, Mark.
I have a slight problem as we've gone through the discussion. Vanessa's saying that we can't do anything because it's community use, or whatever. The summary on here from John Tradewell says, to consider the request to allow Brood Middle School to enter an agreement with Forest of Mercia to plant and maintain a community orchard on charity-controlled land. So the very summary says community, which Vanessa says isn't in our remit. So that's just a point. I would be happy to go ahead with this on the proviso that we have some sort of report back from the school that sets out what they think community use means. What are their plans for the future? And I think as the trust that actually oversees the ground, that's not unreasonable. But it does say here, community use, community orchard.
Tom.
I was going to say, I get your point, but it was just clarified that the community orchard doesn't quite mean what we would normally expect community to mean. That's what you just explained, wasn't it? So it's community orchard, that's just the name of it, but it doesn't mean what we might think it is. It's for the community all around it. It's for the benefit environmentally and for the school, but not that everyone can go and use it. So I think that was already clarified.
Yeah, can I just read a content of an email sent to me by the head teacher? It might just help. I know it's an abbreviation, but hopefully it helps. She says, the land will be used almost entirely for educational purposes. I would estimate 80% plus by the school, primarily by Brood Middle School, but with significant use by St Mary's and St Chad's. Community use is not critical to the project. Its very existence as a haven for pollinators, wildlife, ethic will benefit the community. For example, there are lizards on the site, and at least 2 species of endangered IUCN listed flowers. If community use is a problem for the project, we can accommodate whatever is required to make the project work.
So the headmistress is acknowledging that community use is... And as I still say, because we're the trust that oversees the school, because this is a community orchard application, can we have a letter from her saying what she sees the community connection is in the future?
Did you want to come back in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's perfectly acceptable for us to just clarify with them the requirements of the academy lease and what they can and can't do, and just get that exchange with them so that we are clear what that is, to give the committee some comfort that it won't be outside of the objects of the trust or to the detriment of the school. So I think we could just clarify that, and if you're happy to delegate that to me, then I'm happy to make sure that happens.
Chair, I'm happy with that.
Are you making a proposal, Mark?
The proposal is, Thomas...
Well, we've got to make a choice between saying yes and saying no. If we're saying yes, are you saying yes with conditions, or yes, we just approve?
Yes, yes, with the condition, as Ian's quite rightly said, that we clarify with the school what the community use will be, and that's just, it could come to a future committee, but I think it can just be circulated around members as an email.
Sorry, let's just be absolutely sure. You're proposing that we approve the recommendation, but we make recommendation to the school that they should come back to us with further information at various times, but they have actually got approval to go ahead.
Yes.
Tom?
Yeah, I don't necessarily agree we need it, but if that gets us over the line, then I'm happy to go with that.
Are you happy that we do that the school is clearly getting the approval to go ahead, but we have some slight concerns? Will they come back to us and let us know how they're going to tackle those? Are we all agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed? Okay, that's fine. Thank you very much. That's agreed. I think we are now exclusion of the press and public, but we don't have any other items in private, so we close the meeting at 2:45, and thank you all very much for your attendance.
Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? I've just been doing a bit of research behind the scenes. Councillor Winnington's comment about the return. The return that we're getting on the charity money that is invested with CCLA over the last 3 years to the 30th of June has been 6.8%. So bearing in mind that has the post-COVID bounce in there and also reflects the sort of impact of the war in Ukraine on energy prices, etc. So that sort of 6 to 7% average. I think what it's fair to say is the distribution, that dividend they've paid out has remained consistent at 13.52 pence per unit last year and this year, and is a 2% increase on the previous year as well. So that consistency of income is there, irrespective of what markets do.
Excellent news. Thank you. Very good.
Okay. Thank you all very much for your attendance. Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.